The story is about a human who trusts alien tech for a routine scan, only to endure surgery fully awake. Dr. Malcolm Clark was already halfway through his second cup of Vectory root extract, a drink the alien crew claimed sharpened neural interpretation. He suspected it just dulled the gag reflex. The taste reminded him of moldy licorice soaked in seawater, but he sipped it anyway, not wanting to insult his hosts. Diplomatic courtesy mattered, especially on the Ashtal Varen, a sleek, cathedral-sized research vessel currently orbiting just beyond Europa. Clark wasn't a diplomat by trade. He was a neurologist, a neurophysiologist to be specific, with a background in xenomedicine, making him the Earth delegation's best choice for what the Vectari called a cross-cognitive exchange. Today's demonstration was to be safe, educational, even historic. At least, that was the pitch from Ambassador Thorne when he volunteered. The neural mapping is non-invasive, the Vectari lead medic, Erul, had explained with fluttering enthusiasm. He towered over Clark, his pale scales catching the overhead light in ripple-like patterns. We scan, interpret, and share. Your brain's response to our stimuli will guide future integration. Sounds like an MRI with extra steps, Clark had joked, stepping onto the bio-platform, nodding to the familiar trio of Earth reps watching from behind the observation pane. The last thing he saw was the reassuring thumbs up from Liana Reyes, Earth's medical liaison. The procedure began with soft pulses of colored light, and a hum that deepened as it drilled inward, probing neural architecture. At first, Clark marveled at the precision of the scan. It somehow visualized not just his brain activity, but the micro-patterns along his spinal column, revealing minute fluctuations in nerve impulse velocity. Then, something shifted. A sharp crackle vibrated through his lower spine, like static discharge inside his bones. The lights flickered. His fingers twitched involuntarily, then locked. His voice caught in his throat as the feeling drained from his limbs. Panic surged. He tried to shout, but no sound came. His eyes darted, but even they froze, wide open and unblinking. Erol shouted something in Vectari. Technicians rushed over. Lights changed color. Alarms chirped in multiple languages. Clark felt everything. He just couldn't move. From his frozen vantage, he saw his own body lie motionless, watched as a scan reel displayed neural chaos. His conscious mind was screaming. Severe feedback loop, Earl said, panicked. The spinal nerve cluster is overwhelmed. It's cascading. His peripheral function is completely disrupted. Then reverse the scan, Liana said over the comm, but her voice wavered. Reboot the signal path. We've tried, Errol said. It's not responding. He's descending into complete neurological dissociation. I must act. What kind of act? She demanded. Emergency, surgical, neural relinking. I can stabilize the collapse before permanent damage sets in. We don't even know how your anesthesia affects human brains. There is no time. You said your files were complete. Complete isn't the same as tested. Clark heard everything. They were talking around him, like he wasn't even there. Errol reached into the surgical cabinet. His vitals are erratic. This could lead to brain death if untreated. I will use local paralytic plus cortical sedation. This is a clean field operation. He will feel nothing. He administered a luminescent injection at the base of Clark's skull. The tension in Clark's muscles slackened. His vitals steadied slightly. But his thoughts? Still fully present. His heart pounded. He had no control over his breathing, but his mind flailed in full clarity. He wanted to move, scream, run, something. And then the scalpel entered. The first incision, just below the cervical vertebrae, was clean and efficient. Erol's technique was flawless. To the Vectari, surgery wasn't just medical, it was art. But the anesthetic, which blocked Vectari pain receptors by scrambling prefrontal relay signals, had no such effect on humans. Clark learned this the hard way. Each centimeter of dissection felt like being raked open by icicles. Metal spreaders pushed into tissue he couldn't shield. Instruments dug with surgical grace, extracting small clusters of nerve and tissue, analyzing, then delicately repairing. To everyone else in the room, Clark was stable. His vitals showed only minor distress. Inside, he was breaking. Time fractured into incomprehensible fragments. The pain didn't come in waves, it was continuous, like fire under skin, like knives dancing through sinew. He felt the cold tip of the stimulator probe touch the raw end of a spinal nerve. Electricity arced, and pain shot up to the crown of his skull. He might have vomited if his diaphragm had been his to command. Errol muttered phrases in Vectari. Neural fusion underway, fascicles responding, structural alignment improved. The machine chirped contentedly. Liana's voice buzzed in from the overhead system. How is he? He's responding with an acceptable variance. No unexpected surges. Emotional stability is maintained. Clark wanted to scream. He wanted to say that the only reason his vitals weren't spiking was because his body physically couldn't. The paralysis was complete, but his mind, it lived every second. 2 more probes entered, more pain, more stitching, more calculated cruelty delivered by someone who thought he was helping. At the 2-hour mark, Clark lost all sense of linear time. He started hallucinating. He was sure he was on Earth, in a lecture hall, showing students how neurons fired. Then he was underwater. Then in a hospital back home. Then back on the table, awake, aware, helpless. At the 2-hour, 36-minute mark, something changed. The stabilizer pinged softly, indicating optimal alignment. Clark's breathing was steady, his heart rate even. The autonomic nervous system had been artificially restored. Errol stood back, tentacles folding thoughtfully. Fascinating, he said aloud. Despite the extensive invasion, his emotional parameters are balanced. I must report this. Human neurochemistry is truly more adaptable than anticipated. Liana's voice was cautious. So, he's okay? Errol nodded. He is better than okay. He is harmonizing with the procedure. He may even be developing adaptive resistance. Clark's inner scream reached a pitch he didn't know the human mind could bear. Recovery began with the sutures closing. They used a biological weave that knitted tissue seamlessly. Errol applied topical re-synergizers and disengaged the spinal bypass system. Slowly, function began returning to Clark's peripheral nerves. But sedation never arrived, because medically, he had never shown signs of needing it. When he blinked for the first time, the room cheered. He did not. His throat was dry. He coughed, once. Someone offered water. He couldn't lift his hand. Liana's voice was the first human sound he truly heard. You're awake. How do you feel? Clark looked directly at her. Then, barely audible, I was awake the entire time. Harold turned. That is impossible. I felt everything, Clark whispered. Every incision, every probe, every burn, every tear. Arul's skin dulled slightly. But your vitals. Clark coughed again. It was like being dissected alive while my body played dead. The silence that followed was absolute. And it lasted long enough for Clark to watch Erul take a slow step backward, the truth cracking through the alien's professional pride. I will file a full incident report, Erul said, voice low. Clark closed his eyes, finally in control again. The pain was still there, but distant now. You need to rewrite everything you know about humans and anesthesia. Erul didn't reply, but the way he stood still, humbled, said enough. Clark's recovery chamber was a warm beige cube lit from behind translucent panels. The ambient hume of the Ashtal Varan was ever present, like the low throb of a distant engine filtered through layers of cotton. He was off the surgical table, but not off the hook. Every inch of his body protested even the smallest movements, and his spine sent dull electric shocks through his lower back with every breath. He had been in recovery for nearly 19 hours, not that he'd slept much. The human medical team aboard the ship hovered close. Liana Reyes refused to leave the room. She sat upright in a plastiform chair by the bed, flipping through Clark's neural telemetry for the 5th time that hour. They still don't get it, Clark said hoarsely. They're analyzing why I stayed calm, not realizing I wasn't. I'd explaining it. Earl asked if we could teach him how humans maintain such stoicism under duress. Clark gave a dry, bitter laugh that turned into a cough. Stoicism? I nearly passed out from pain. Liana looked up, brows pinched with worry. They're writing symposium abstracts about you. Great, Clark muttered. I'm an interstellar freak show. Despite the attempt at levity, he couldn't ignore the tremor in his own hands. His right hand, the stronger one, shook slightly when he tried to grip his water flask. He switched to the left, which fared no better. Liana finally set the tablet down. Clark, you need to let me submit a trauma evaluation. I'm a neurologist, not a soldier. They'll use it to discredit my testimony. Your testimony isn't being questioned, she said quietly. But if you don't report the psychological impact, they'll think what happened is acceptable. That landed like a weight on his chest. He nodded once, slowly. File it. Be honest. He didn't need to ask what was in the file. Every word he said post-surgery had been recorded. His description, clinical, halting, shaking with the strain of recollection, had already spread through the medical decks. He remembered the look on Erol's face. Horror, yes, but also something else. A scientist's fear not of failure, but of fundamentally misunderstanding the system he had claimed to master. Later that day, Erol visited. The Vektari medic entered without ceremony, accompanied by a junior aide and a data pad brimming with graphs. He stood near the foot of Clark's bed, tall and still, his scales dull gray-blue under the medbay lights. I have reviewed all data from the procedure, he said after a pause. Your pain centers showed negligible spikes. Your endocrine response was flat. I was paralyzed, Clark replied. My heart couldn't race, my muscles couldn't clench, I couldn't even cry, but I felt everything. Erol tapped his datapad. Then the error was not in detection, but in interpretation. Your body deceived our instruments. My body didn't. Your instruments weren't made for humans. Erol's head inclined slightly, a Vektari gesture of concession. We assumed shared universals in nociceptive reaction. We were incorrect. Very, Clark said. Erol took a breath, not that Vektari needed to breathe the way humans did. But the gesture still seemed practiced, almost human. I have proposed a full reclassification of human anesthesia compatibility. Furthermore, I have suspended all cross-species surgical protocols involving Earth representatives. Until this data is studied, Clark narrowed his eyes. And the scan, the original mapping procedure, automated from the exchange program. Effective immediately, we've isolated the feedback loop caused by a phase mismatch in your spinal relay field. Your neural structure was too electrically reactive for our resonance thresholds. No kidding, Clark said, rubbing his shoulder. The skin there still felt like it had been scalded, though the burn had only occurred beneath the surface. You're lucky I didn't stroke out mid-procedure. Erol's gaze dropped. If I had known... You didn't, but you should have. That silenced the alien for a long moment. I will not repeat this mistake, Erol said finally. May I ask a question? Clark nodded. Why did your mind not fracture? No sedation, no movement, no defense, but you retained cohesion. Clark stared at the ceiling for a long time before answering. I wish I could say training or mental discipline, but the truth is, I couldn't afford to break. I didn't know if my brain would be next. Erol blinked slowly. Clark turned toward him. Humans endure a lot, not because we want to, but because if we don't, we die. We evolved around surviving what should kill us. Erol made a faint humming sound. This capacity is rare. That's not capacity. That's desperation. The Vektari doctor bowed slightly, more formal this time. You have altered our understanding of interspecies medicine. I've nominated you for the Vektari Medal of Endurance. Clark blinked. That's a military award, isn't it? It predates our standing military. It's awarded to those who demonstrate fortitude beyond biologic expectation. I just didn't die, Clark said. That is precisely why you qualify. He left shortly after, and Clark lay back again, exhausted. His body still ached. He felt like a mannequin with nerves stretched too tight over a frame not built for such tension. He closed his eyes for just a moment and startled awake when his med monitor pinged. Liana entered moments later with a frown. "You slept for 20 minutes, first time in 2 days." Felt like 5 seconds. She sat beside him. "You've got a message from Earth." Clark rubbed his eyes. "Let me guess, committee wants to debrief me." "More than that," she hesitated. "There's diplomatic backlash. The Vectari Council admitted medical fault and suspended all experimental procedures with human subjects. But some of our delegates are furious it happened in the first place. Rightfully so. There's pressure to withdraw from the exchange program entirely." Clark shook his head. "No, that's not the answer. We don't fix this by backing out. We fix it by showing up and making sure it never happens again." "You want to go back to work?" "I want to teach them," Clark said. "You said Errol wrote symposium abstracts. Let's make them accurate." "You're insane." "Only mildly. Most of that got cut out during the surgery." She snorted despite herself. Clark adjusted the incline of his bed with a slow hiss of the control valve. "Give me a week to heal. I'll start drafting new protocol baselines." "You're not cleared for standing yet." "I'll write them lying down." She rolled her eyes but smiled, just slightly. That night, Clark finally slept without monitors waking him. No alarms, no dreams. Just the muted quiet of a ship full of beings who were, for once, learning exactly how fragile and how resilient a human could be. 3 days later, Clark stood wobbly, exhausted but upright. The bioskeletal exosupport molded around his spine like a second skin, transmitting subtle pressure to guide his posture. It hummed faintly with each step, a reminder that walking was now a calculated effort rather than something automatic. His first trip outside the medbay wasn't about proving anything to himself. It was about presence. Letting the Vectari crew see him moving, living, recovering. The humans weren't just patients or curiosities, they were colleagues, and Clark knew the optics of that mattered. Biana shadowed him from half a pace behind. "I told you we could run the meeting from your room. And I told you I hate looking like an invalid." "You don't. You look like someone who should be in bed." "Thanks for the vote of confidence." They reached the briefing deck, a circular chamber framed in concentric rings of display panels. 8 Vectari scientists sat at the primary table, alongside 2 human delegates and one of the interspecies liaison officers. The air shifted subtly when Clark entered, like everyone collectively held a breath they hadn't known they were taking. Errol stood. "Dr. Clark, I did not expect you in person." "Neither did my lumbar region," Clark said, carefully lowering himself into a seat. "But here I am." He glanced around the room. "We need to talk about surgical standards, and why our understanding of each other's biology isn't where it should be." The next 2 hours were slow, methodical, and deeply uncomfortable. Not because of physical pain, though Clark's spine burned halfway through, but because each participant had to confront how close they'd come to catastrophic failure. They weren't reviewing hypotheticals anymore. They had a case study sitting in front of them, breathing shallowly and suppressing tremors. Errol presented a visual breakdown of the surgery, mapping neural activations and response curves. "We incorrectly calibrated our sedative analog to match standard human pain pathways, assuming proportional pharmacologic responses. The reality diverged significantly." Clark leaned forward. "We don't have a central pain organ. We're systemic reactors. Block one area, others compensate. Your compound dulled motor reflexes and calmed respiration, but it never touched my limbic system." A Vectari neurologist to Earl's left tapped her pad. "So, while your body didn't resist the procedure, your brain still processed all sensory data?" "Every second," Clark said flatly. "But because my motor cortex was decoupled, you interpreted the absence of reaction as success." The silence after that was weighty. Realization settled into the room like dust. "We don't get to be vague about the differences," Clark continued. You want human cooperation in cross-species medicine? Start with actual anatomical respect. Liana handed out the revised protocol sheets. We've itemized over 40 known divergences in anesthetic response, and that's just from the Earth Medical Archives. Clark and I are compiling first-hand documentation from this event as a supplement. Another Victoria across the table, a quiet observer until now, spoke for the first time. How are you functioning at all? By your account, you endured trauma significant enough to cause long-term neurological dissonance. Clark rubbed his temple. I might, still, but function is sometimes just forcing the next breath. That's not resilience. That's biology with a grudge. Arul cleared his throat. Then we owe your biology an apology, and more than that, a framework for safety. The rest of the meeting proceeded with clear, focused discussion. For once, everyone agreed this incident could not repeat itself. Clark was glad for that. But by the time he returned to the medbay, he had to be half-carried by Liana and a ship aide. You pushed too far, she said, helping him ease back into the gurney. I needed to. They'll remember this better now. You're lucky your spinal nerve lattice is healing. Another few days, you'll get sensation fully back in your right leg. That's the plan, Clark murmured, already half asleep. He didn't wake again until the next morning. This time he found a visitor waiting quietly in the corner. A Vektari not from the medical staff, but from the cultural wing. High robes, ceremonial cuffs. The unmistakable presence of someone used to issuing formal declarations. Dr. Clark, the envoy said, I bring word from the outer council. Clark blinked, trying to sit up straighter. They're not revoking our membership, are they? Quite the opposite. Your name has been officially entered into the Order of Shared Trials, an honor extended to only those who have advanced Vektari understanding through personal sacrifice. Clark tilted his head. That sounds rather loaded. It is not political. It is cultural. Recognition, not reward. Do I have to attend a ceremony? The envoy gave a soft trill. Only if you wish, but I am here on behalf of someone else too. Erul requested permission to accompany you to Earth. Clark blinked. Why? To learn. He believes that if he is to treat your species in future, he must understand your environment, your vulnerabilities, your context. Clark considered this. And if he does, what's to stop him from making another mistake? Failure is only terminal if it isn't studied, the envoy said. Later that day, Erul visited again, but this time he didn't bring data. He brought questions, hundreds of them, some medical, many philosophical. Clark answered what he could, and when he couldn't, Liana filled in. They stayed in that discussion for hours. Somewhere between discussions of human pain tolerance and autonomic functions, Erul asked something different. What did you think about during the procedure? Clark hesitated. I thought about not dying. I thought about every terrible surgery scene I'd ever seen in fiction, and prayed they weren't about to become my reality. They do not sound stabilizing. No, but it was familiar. That kind of fear, it's something every doctor knows before their first real trauma case. You feel it, and you move through it. Erul seemed deeply affected by this. Then your species endures not just through biology, but through memory. Clark nodded. And storytelling. Pain becomes legacy when we survive it, so others don't repeat it. By the end of the week, Clark was walking unassisted. The spinal support was still recommended, but he could manage controlled movement without external aid. His reflexes returned, in stages, touch, then flex, then fine motor control. Physical therapy continued daily. When the Oshtal Varan made orbit around Mars for crew rotation, Clark stood in the docking bay, with Liana beside him. Errol joined them with a single travel bag and a tablet full of open inquiries. I am told I will need clearance from 3 Earth medical boards, Errol said. You'll get them, Clark replied. The two shared a brief, mutual glance. No animosity, just acknowledgement. Said Errol added quietly, You taught me more than a library's worth of journals ever could. I didn't teach, Clark said. I just survived. Errol lowered his gaze. That may be the greatest lesson of all. Errol's arrival on Earth drew less fanfare than anticipated. No press coverage, no photo ops, just a quiet clearance through the International Medical Liaison's Gateway compound outside Canberra, where the air was crisp and the privacy guaranteed. Clark insisted on it. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about accountability and the slow rebuilding of trust, one data point at a time. They started at the Neuroadaptation Institute in Sydney, where Errol observed human patients in long-term neurorehabilitation. Clark walked him through each case: spinal injuries from motor accidents, neurodegeneration from age, post-operative traumas. The quiet suffering behind every face was not lost on the Vektari medic. These injuries, Errol noted during one review, many result in partial recovery. Correct, Clark said. We don't regenerate nerves the way your species does. We build around damage. Adaptation through compensation. Exactly. Then why pursue recovery at all if adaptation is your strength? Clark paused, watching a boy in his teens practice walking with a brace. Because we remember what we could do before, and some of us aren't ready to let that go. Errol absorbed that in silence. Over the next few weeks, they conducted joint interviews, wrote co-authored protocols, and submitted detailed findings to both the Earth Interstellar Medical Bureau and the Vektari Academy of Neurophysiology. Clark found himself recalibrating to not just his body, which still ached every morning, but his instincts. He'd always considered medicine a science of fixes. Errol had taught him in his own way that sometimes it was a science of questions. By the fourth week, word of the revised interspecies protocols began circulating. Clark's name appeared on every draft. So did Errol's. Together, they formed the new template for cross-species surgical standards, with mandatory human-specific anesthesia reviews, multi-species sedation trials, and fail-safe overrides built into every neural mapping device. It was technical, exhausting work, but it meant that no human would ever again lie paralyzed on an alien table, feeling their body torn open while their minds screamed in silence. That mattered. Clark's physical recovery hit a milestone at week 5. His balance had improved, his tremors had nearly stopped, and sensation had fully returned to his right leg. He'd walked a full kilometer unaided the previous day, his gait still a bit stiff but steady. Liana had kept the stats, she always did. The three of them, Clark, Liana, and Errol, sat together that evening on a quiet veranda outside the Institute's main building. The wind carried eucalyptus and salt. Earth's sky shimmered with stars. Errol couldn't name. Clark handed him a glass of water. You'll need that. Human ceremonies require hydration, lots of standing. Errol turned the glass slowly in his hands. This medal of endurance? It is typically awarded posthumously among my kind. I noticed you left that out earlier. I thought you'd decline if you knew. It might have. Liana grinned. You wouldn't have. You're too stubborn for that. The ceremony itself was private, conducted in a mirrored chamber at the Institute with a live stream to the Vektari Home Council. Errol delivered the commendation in Vektari, then translated it himself. Malcolm Clark, he said, standing straight beside him, in surviving an ordeal which tested the boundaries of interspecies understanding, in enduring pain without escape or acknowledgement, and in choosing to educate rather than condemn, you have embodied what our ancestors once called Keirat Navel, the mind which breaks, then teaches others where the cracks begin. Clark bowed his head slightly as the honor was digitally inscribed onto his interspecies record. He wouldn't wear a medal. There was no physical badge. But in every registry from Earth to Vektar, his name would now stand beside the few who had reshaped interstellar medicine through sacrifice. Later that night, after the final guests had departed and the room was quiet again, Clark sat alone in the garden courtyard. Liana found him there, arms folded, watching the wind stir the leaves. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Mostly," he said. "Sometimes my back locks up if I sit too long. Sometimes I still dream about the table." She sat beside him. "That'll pass." Maybe." Or maybe I just get used to it. And that's kind of humanity's whole thing, isn't it? Clark gave a tired smile. We adapt. She nudged his shoulder. You did more than that. You changed the rules. He shook his head. No, I just told the truth. The rules changed because someone finally listened. At that moment, Errol stepped into the courtyard, holding a small, translucent crystal. He extended it to Clark. This is for you, he said. A copy of the neural procedure log, amended with your post-op testimony. It will be archived in our Hall of Adaptation. Clark took it gently. Doesn't that usually require consensus approval? It does. And you received it unanimously. Clark turned the crystal in his fingers. Inside, faint light pulsed in spirals, like nerves firing. So that's it? He asked. It is a beginning, Errol replied. The kind born of endings. There was nothing more to say after that, not really. The damage was done. The healing was slow. But the story had meaning. And meaning was what turned suffering into something more than memory. By the end of the month, Clark returned to active duty, albeit part-time. Errol began a full observational residency at the Institute. Liana transferred to oversee the new interspecies training cohort. The world didn't change overnight. But in operating rooms across systems, new alerts blinked red when a mismatch occurred. New compounds were triple-checked. New hands paused where once they might have rushed forward. And somewhere, aboard a research ship orbiting a faraway moon, a technician ran a scan and paused at a name in the protocols. Dr. Malcolm Clark. Beneath it, human nerve systems require case-specific anesthesia. Never assume paralysis equals sedation. That sentence, highlighted in bold, saved lives. Clark never asked for statues or plaques. He didn't want them. All he ever wanted was for no one else to feel what he did, trapped in silence, dissected while alive. And now, they wouldn't. That was enough.